Peace to everyone. May the peace and blessings of the Creator be upon you all. And on behalf of the Alliance for Absolute Justice Women, we welcome you and appreciate your presence on this Saturday afternoon on the East Coast, late morning on the West Coast, for our program, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. Throughout this time together, I would hope that everyone keeps in their hearts and minds that the presenters will speak about the souls of women who lived and who may no longer be here in the physical form, but their spiritual bodies whose lives were meaningful to their families, and the tremendous impact that affects their families is so important. And keep in mind the persistence of this problem continues to put Indigenous women at risk. So it's our religious practice as Muslims to always start with a prayer. So first we will have a Quranic recitation from our holy book by Shayla Ahmed, a member of AAJ Women. And then this will be followed by a one minute of silence, a silent prayer in respect for the victims, their families, and the positive efforts towards addressing these difficulties. So I'm going to first have Shayla recite from the Holy Quran.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. I seek refuge with Allah from Satan the accursed. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. Verily, Allah enjoins justice and the doing of good to others, and giving like kindred, and forbids indecency and manifest evil and transgression. He admonishes you that you may take heed. Holy Quran, chapter 16, verse 91. Thank you.
Jazakallah, thank you so much, Shayla, for your beautiful recitation. And so I'd like to just share with you this quote by Chief Seattle. And then after that, I'm going to ask everyone if we would just take 30 seconds for silent prayer. Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. So if everyone would just raise their hands and let's all put our hands together in silent prayer. Amen. So I would like to just take a minute to review the order of the program. So we've had the recitation of the Holy Quran, and we will also, our first speaker will be Carolyn DeFord. We'll have Laura Bluehorse-Swift, Dr. Colleen Lelli, and then we will have a question and answer session. And these will be some facilitated questions with the panel, and then we will have closing remarks. So I just wanted to share a little bit about AAJ Women. We're not going to spend a lot of time with it, but just a brief introduction. Our mission statement is that we're Muslim women dedicated to advocating for social justice solutions by forming alliances in support of equity for women and marginalized groups. And the AAJ Women really is founded on the practices of the holy founder of Islam, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him. And he created this organization of an alliance of Muslims and non-Muslims, and it was called Hilful Fadul. And these Muslims and non-Muslims joined together and they formed alliances for the betterment of the society, and particularly not just for the powerful. And so this organization, this collaboration really helped the society. And it's based on those practices that AAJ Women is sort of following in those footsteps. And we have three guiding principles. Obviously, number one is absolute justice. And number two is, the second one is that we should try to grant someone more than his or her due. So, I mean, even if someone works for you, or you have or someone does a job for you, or someone does an act of kindness, that not only do you want to sort of repay that kindness, but you want to add a little bit addition to it. So you want to do more for that person that they've actually given to you. And then the third principle, which is the highest form of social justice, is actually to treat others with such grace and overwhelming benevolence as one would treat one's own kindred. And that was also shared in the verse that Shayla recited for us. And so this concept is really that we're all humankind, and we should look at these acts of justice in the same manner that a mother would act towards his or her child. So how would a mother act towards her child? It would be with love and compassion, forgiveness, and she would do everything to, want to save her child and look after her child. And in the same manner, we should also look after, members in society as well. So just a little bit about AAJ. And now I would like to move on to our first speaker, Carolyn DeFord. We are so honored that she would give up her time. She's extremely busy. I just have to say that. She is a trafficking project coordinator for the Puyallup tribe of Indians in the greater Seattle area. And she's also the founder of Missing and Murdered Native Americans. So if you take a look, we'll just look at her biography here. So I just want to mention here that when she began her journey, her mother, Leona Kinsey, is actually a statistic. She went to a store in La Grande, Oregon, and never returned. And so Carolyn has found personal healing and a sense of purpose in helping others, and is passionate about the importance of culture in trauma and recovery. Today, Carolyn works under the Puyallup Tribes Community Domestic Violence Advocacy Program as a trafficking project coordinator, and the advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women and people. And her goal is to relieve some of the helplessness families feel when a loved one goes missing, and collaborate with service providers to foster protective factors, engagement, and healing for Native people in urban areas and throughout Indian country. So I'm going to, at this point, let Carolyn share her screen, and she'll be our first speaker.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Like all my notes are the slideshow view. Because it's not letting me change. That's okay. As long as you can see it.
Okay. Do you want to try to put it in presentation mode, or?
Yeah, but it's not letting me. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if that was my hiccup.
Okay.
Okay, is that better? Can we see it now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So my name is Carolyn DeFord. My mother is Leona LeClaire Kinsey. She went missing in 1999. It's what kind of started me doing this kind of work and led me down the prevention path. The presentation I'm going to do today is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People, a very brief introduction. This is something that we could typically talk about for probably a full 16 hours, but we're going to do 15 minutes and try and hit the main points and give you a good understanding of kind of the origin and what it is. The link between human trafficking and domestic violence is very prevalent, and so we're going to talk about that a little bit and how you can help. Why we're not going to the next slide? Me and Zoom have a funny little relationship with each other. This is a very sensitive topic. We're going to talk about some issues that may hit close to home. So if you need to step away and take care of yourself, have a drink of water, take a few breaths, please do so. We do our best to be sensitive to other people's experiences and share this information in a good way. But sometimes feelings come up that we're not prepared for, or emotions that we didn't even know were tied to this topic or that were there. So if that happens, please take care of yourself. If you want to chat or talk afterwards, feel welcome to message me and we can arrange something to talk. We come into this work acknowledging that it's our ancestors' prayers who brought us together. We're grateful for the teachings that they've given us, for the stories and the blessings that we have that help us to move through life with a balance in mind, body, and spirit. And we always graciously and humbly strive to embrace that and pass it on to our future generations. There's a few acronyms we have to know about. You might hear MMIW, MMIP, MMIWP. There's a couple more, MMIW, MMIWG2, which is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, and Two-Spirit. And Two-Spirit is kind of a Indigenous acknowledgement of our LGBTQIA. And MMIWR, which is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Relatives. It's a social justice movement that started in Canada. Several families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and people came together to draw attention to the high rates of homicide and missing cases, and particularly women and girls. And they started this in the 80s as kind of a street corner rally, like very grassroots. It has grown and gotten international attention at this point, and they've done a fantastic job paving the way for us and doing their work in prayer as well. Remember, like Rashida said, that these are our sisters and brothers, our mothers, our fathers. These are our stories, and these situations hit very close to home. Why we wear red. This is just a little bit of background when we are doing some of our events or MMIW awareness work. There's the color red has kind of been adapted in representation of MMIW. Various tribes, there's several reasons, but various tribes see the color red or believe that the color red is the only color that will transcend the physical world into the spirit world, being again that the only color that our ancestors would be able to see, or that the spirits can see. And the intention or the purpose is that we hope that by wearing red, we can call back the missing spirits of our women and children, and we can lay them to rest. Some people paint the red handprint over their face. That is to symbolize the silence that our families have had for so long, and the voices that have been taken away from our victims. There's also a red dress that is kind of symbolic of the movement, and we have a red dress project, or you may see red dresses hanging in community when we're acknowledging this issue. And those red dresses represent the individuals that should be here, that should be taking that space. And I just want to bullet point too, like when we're saying MMIW, that's how the movement started, but I do mean MMIWP. This is work that is done for all of our people. If we're going to solve the problem, we have to look at the whole problem. And so we acknowledge the men in that. It's just, I sometimes forget to include the P when I'm speaking. So what is happening? Where are they going? Why do we have such high rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women and people? There's several different factors that come into this, and we're going to talk about the risk factors as well. But the first couple, domestic violence and human trafficking, and both of those having a high connection to homicide, runaway youth or fleeing domestic violence, homelessness being the leading cause of domestic violence, is the leading cause of homelessness in our community. And some folks are intentional and in hiding. That's part of the fleeing. So there's many that we believe may be homicides that just haven't been found yet. But there's a lot of reasons why people go missing, and we can never like really label them all for the same because there's so many. This is a Mod Podge of a timeline of federal Indian policy. It's really, the screen wasn't big enough to put all of the policies in here or to have them all the right size, but I bolded and enlarged the ones that really pertain to or have a really strong impact, particularly on this issue. They all do, but these are the ones that kind of hit the hardest. So in 1885, the Major Crimes Act gave federal government the jurisdiction over all violent crimes on tribal land. Tribal people were put on reservations, and this is our Indian nation. This is our land that the federal government held in reserve for us. It can't be taken. It should always be under the jurisdiction and tribal sovereignty of the sovereign nation that resides there. So I work on the Puyallup Reservation in Tacoma, Washington, and that is our area, our boundaries, where we have jurisdiction over our people and the ability to govern ourselves and make our own rules and laws. In 1885, the government took that ability to have jurisdiction over violent crimes in tribal land away. In 1887, the boarding school era really blew up. It started a little bit earlier than this, but In 1887, there were 200 boarding schools. Over 14,000 children were stolen. That plays a huge factor into what we're going to talk about today. And I just want to pinpoint the history in that, because it really goes back a long time. The President of the United States decided that he was going to give the churches the power and authority to determine whether children or families, Indian families, were raising their children in a civilized manner. And then he allotted them, I believe it was $70 per child. And back then that was a lot of money. He gave the churches $70 per child for each child that they brought into their church to learn the arts of civilization. So they had these boarding schools where they brought the kids in. The next is the Allotment Act, where they took those reservations that we had, the whole boundary. We had jurisdiction over the whole boundary. We could do whatever was set forth in the treaties within that land. And they decided that we weren't assimilating fast enough, living in a communal society the way we traditionally had. So they broke those reservations down into allotments, and each head of household got a small portion of allotment. An allotment would be like maybe 5 to 15 acres of land that was given to the head of household of each family. Really large families might have gotten two allotments, or could break it down into 2 separate spaces. But they had a lot of land left over when they took the reservations and allotted them. So rather than redistributing it so that it was fair and the tribes and the individuals got it redistributed and had a little bit more land, they passed a law or an act to allow the government to auction off the remaining land. So that auction, that ability to auction off the remaining land that was in the ownership of tribes, plays a huge part in the very beginning of missing and murdered, as settlers were realizing the value of the farmland, and that tribes didn't see themselves as owning land. When you see yourselves as part of it and interconnected, the concept of owning something, that the land and the Mother Earth and everything within it is alive and has spirit, you don't see it as something to own. And so the settlers thought, they were realizing that they could get this land and use it and farm it and kind of exploit the natural resources within the land. And they would clear cut timber, and they would harvest all of the salmon and harvest all of the wildlife, the deer and elk within an area, and poison the waters. And that really had a detrimental effect on our communities, because that land being worth so much and being able to purchase it by auction, and tribal communities not understanding the value, having a monetary value on that, they were swindled out of it, and told, swindled out of it for various reasons, but they were also murdered, so that if the land wasn't held by the head of household anymore, because he was for whatever reason not there, or she was for whatever reason not there, then it could be auctioned off. And so that was another huge incentive that was really prominent in my community, but also the Osage tribe also dealt with a lot of this because of the oil that was on their land. And then the final one is the Oliphant decision, or the Oliphant Act. It stripped the tribes of criminal jurisdiction over non-natives on Indian land. So if a non-native comes into our reservation within our boundaries and they commit a crime, our police, our government can't do anything. There's no authority over them as far as criminal acts go within our reservations. There have been some fixes to that. The Special Domestic Violence Criminal Jurisdiction now allows certain tribes who can meet the very, very difficult criteria to have special domestic violence criminal jurisdiction, and they can prosecute certain domestic violence crimes within the reservation. And that criteria is hard to get, and the amount of jurisdiction that they get for that work is really minimal. They can only do, I believe it's 3 years of sentencing and $1,000 or $5,000 in fines. I can't can't recall, it has changed, but it's really it's not equal in the prosecution that we can have over non-natives on our land versus what the federal government has over natives on our own land and on non-native land. So how did we get here? We've got to look at some of the facts that go into those issues. The National Vital Statistics System reported that homicide was the third leading cause of death among Native males ages 1 to 44 and the sixth for Native females ages 1 to 44. In some data, it reports that homicide is the leading cause of death for Native women, the third leading cause of death for Native women. But I think it kind of depends on what year that information has come from. And this was the most recent that I could find. Homicide is also the leading cause of death for pregnant women of all ethnicities. That's really shocking to me because, you know, a lot of us, our cultures believe that women are sacred, but especially in that time when we're carrying life and as life givers. And traditionally we would have protected that mother and that baby together from anything bad and from stress or from harm or anything that could have had a detrimental effect on the baby. And now that is the leading cause of death for all women. The domestic violence and the link to homicide. This is such a, you know, domestic violence has been prevalent in our community since the boarding school era. Prior to boarding schools, there was no such thing as domestic violence. There was no such thing as rape or human trafficking or child abuse. It just did not happen. There were value systems that were in place that were so strong that wasn't an issue for us. And if it did become an issue, that person was usually sentenced to death or removed entirely from the community. But domestic violence is responsible for nearly 75% of all Native women homicides, 75%. Washington State, it's 2.8 times higher than other races. And then I thought that, you know, in Minnesota, they're murdered at 23% of the total women murdered were Native. We're only 1.3% of the population there. Here in Washington State, missing cases are 6% of Native American people are 6% of our state's missing persons, yet we only make up 2% of our population in Washington. So the disparities in those statistics across the board for domestic violence, human trafficking, and missing people and homicides are all that disproportionate. So here we're going to connect some of that policy with these statistics and the effect that those policies have had. When we can't prosecute for crimes, there's no consequence for homicide on our land. That if you can't prosecute for domestic violence or rape, there's no consequence for that. And the majority of those crimes are intraracial, so it's non-Native crime on Native people. And the majority of them now are happening off of tribal land. So they're happening out where we don't have jurisdiction anyway. But the boarding school era, when our children were taken to boarding school, everything of their cultural value or cultural beliefs was ripped away from them. And I'm not going to go deep into that because Laura's got a really beautiful way of presenting that in a manner that really hits home. But losing those cultural beliefs led to this high rate of violence. The risk factors for missing and murdered to be one of these victim of domestic violence, homicide, human trafficking, or violence in general is rooted in historical trauma. And when these children were taken to boarding school, the phrase "kill the Indian and save the man" was prevalent in the schools, and that was the idea that they would take the Indian beliefs, traditions, values out of that child, and all that would be left of them would be an empty man, with the goal of assimilation. Some of the tribal data that relates to missing persons, you can see on here, 77% of our missing people were missing off of tribal land. 80% of them resided off of tribal land. And then investigating agencies, most of the investigations for them are non-tribal. And I guess how to explain how that affects communities, or being that this is an issue that we really need outside of our circle, outside of our tribes, to take action and take serious, because this is happening off of reservation. The investigations are off reservation. The places that our folks are going missing is off reservation. And so if they're not being acted on out in the urban areas in our cities and counties and states, if they're not being taken serious and looked for, we're having this loss of community, how that affects our communities when we lose somebody, and the ripple effect of that, but also the breakdown in communication from our law enforcement, and the ability for our people to trust service providers, to trust the system in any way, to trust law enforcement, that if we make a report, the odds of it getting solved or being handled in a manner that align with our cultural beliefs is nearly impossible. But I like to show the missing from tribal land and missing off tribal land, because when we're searching, this is why it's so critical that the message gets outside of our circle, because it's people who don't live in our reservation that we need to engage in these searches. There's a data challenge that exists in here too. And if you don't have accurate data, you don't have a problem. You know, if there's no data for something, it really doesn't exist as far as statistics or getting any help or research goes. Some of these statistics were taken from federal, tribal, and state. The FBI's Unified Crime Report contains information from all three sources, but data is voluntary. So the only agency that is required is the federal government, but city, state, and tribal are all voluntary. So that information isn't accurate. And it only counts for crimes reported to law enforcement that those agencies choose to submit. So they get to pick and choose what they want to show in there. So if they don't want to show high homicide rates or high missing rates, high rapes, they don't have to. Many agencies across the nation aren't required to record Native American as race at all. I believe Maine might still be one of them, that Native American isn't an option as a race on their police reports or any of their data collection. And we're frequently misclassified as other or anything but Native American. My mom was missing for 18 years before they finally changed her classification from white to Native. And that happens quite frequently, but it's also happening with Indian immigrants and how do I say? A lot of our residents who are Indian in ethnicity from India, they are also recorded sometimes in here as Native American, because the official federal language for that is American Indian Alaska Native. So a lot of agencies just put them in that bucket. What you can do to raise awareness, you can wear red on May 5th. There's a National Day Awareness for Missing and Murdered Native American Girls. It was started in 2017 after a young woman named Hannah Harris went missing on the Cheyenne Reservation and was later found murdered. Her family didn't get any search support. They were told that she's probably out partying, which is what a lot of our families hear, that they're probably out partying, they're out having a good time, they don't have to come home if they don't want to. And so nobody searches for them. So Hannah's family went out and searched for her, and they were the ones that found her. Her mother was a really strong advocate for awareness and for policy change. And a lot of this awareness that we have in the United States now is because of her strength and her voice in fighting for her daughter and for all of our communities to have better policies and searches for their people. We're always putting out calls for help to come help us search. If you see one of those and you can volunteer, please volunteer. And it doesn't mean that you have to go out and search, but if you have access to computer and you can send posters to people, to hotels or to public transit, or hand them out at the store or put them on bulletin boards where you go, that is super important for us. Support families and listen and learn about the issue because it's different for everybody. What took our family members from us may look different. My situation looks different from everybody else's situation. None of it is the same, but it all still holds these same risk factors, the lack of investigation and the hurt and harm that's perpetuated on the families, and the healing that is necessary afterwards is all shared. And then recognize the lands that you're on and the true history of those Indigenous people. This violence against Native people is also perpetuated because of the invisibility, the refusal of our cities, states, and counties to acknowledge that this is the land that we're on is Indigenous land and that we are still here. And that process of erasure is still present today. And then call out violence, racism, and objectification of women, the stereotypes, and we see that in mascots and some namings of cities, towns, mountains, programming. Just call that out and be aware of how that may have a negative effect on the people that they're representing with that. And this is preventable. So we're grateful, always grateful to come together and share information and honor our missing and murdered. When I come and tell my story or share my full presentation about my mom, this is how I hold ceremony for her, by sharing. And this is my sacred item, my story, my mom's life and her, what happened to her and how that has led me is my sacred item. It's the one thing that people, it can't get taken away. I can't lose it in a fire. It is mine to honor her with and to share and hopefully drive some change and incite people to see a little bit deeper into the issue. This is preventable. We can change this. It doesn't have to be this way, but we need everybody coming to the table. My contact information is below. And these are just a few resources of agencies or organizations that may be able to help or provide more information. There's a lot of social media pages out there now that are sharing posters and supporting families. One of the things that we do is offer emotional support and advocacy for families in helping them create posters. If they're afraid to talk on the phone to law enforcement, then we'll get on the phone with them and just advocate with them on the phone or help them find resources to fund searches. It's really expensive if you have to take time off of work and put gas in your car and still feed your children and drive all over the countryside and city to look for your people, to look for your loved one. So anytime that we can help fund that, we try to do that, or even to send care packages and groceries, because sometimes they're too busy searching to think about putting food on their table. This is Rosenda Strong. She went missing from Yakima, Washington in 2018. Her body was found a year and a half, just almost 2 years later, in a freezer on the reservation. And her family was told by several community members that they would find her on a freezer, but the search areas that they were allowed to go into, the private property and the areas that they were allowed to go on, didn't allow for them to reach the area where she was found. And she was laid to rest this summer. She was finally able to be released from the FBI, and her family was able to send her on her journey in a good way. So we have several missing people, and we just always want to make sure that we're honoring and acknowledging who they were and the impact that their loss has had on our families and communities, and share this information in the hopes that it prevents further people from going missing, and that maybe today we plant a seed that sticks with you and incites you to want to learn more or do more to be a part of our solution. I thank you for your time. Now that I'm warmed up and I'm not stuttering anymore, I'm done. Thank you,
Carolyn. Your presentation was extraordinary. There's so much information there. Thank goodness it is being recorded. And I am going to go back and probably watch this multiple times because it really is quite informative and there's so many layers of complexity there. So thank you so much for sharing. So next we're going to have Laura, please. One moment, please. I'd like to introduce Laura. So next we will have Laura Bluehorse-Swift. She's an enrolled member of the Spirit Lake Sioux tribe, who as a result of the relocation policy was raised on the Puyallup Tribal Reservation. She is in her 26th year of working professionally with this community's youth and families. The combination of direct service and understanding of community culture has provided a unique foundation for successful advocacy to those who have been impacted by crime. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Laura and she's going to share her screen. Welcome, Laura. Glad you made it safely.
Oh, goodness. Yes, I'm glad I made it here. There was a number of things that happened that I almost didn't make it. So I'm just grateful that I'm here. I want to put my hands up to you who are sponsoring this and giving us space to talk about these important issues. Amikiapie iteskawi made wakantan oyate mitawachi tishonkato ampatuluta longiti wahe mitawachi. My Indian name is Whiteface Woman. I come from the Bluehorse Langi families. As part of the relocation policy, I have grown up since the time I was 8 years old on the Puyallup Tribal Reservation in Tacoma, Washington. I'd like to acknowledge the Spulipapsh Siayats on the land that I live and work on. I'm in my office here on the tribal reservation. I'm very grateful to be here and to be able to share this short time with you folks, and just grateful to be here. Thankful for Carolyn and her amazing presentation. It's so difficult to think about condensing this issue into a 15-minute piece. So I'm going to do my best to get through this and share with you some of the work that I've been doing here on the Puyallup Tribe Reservation as the program manager / MDT facilitator / whatever needs to be done on any given day here at our center. We are a child advocacy center that has now submitted our accreditation application. Our mission is to provide advocacy, a multidisciplinary response to decrease re-traumatization of children, elders, and vulnerable adults who are victims of crime. We provide victim advocacy services. We provide forensic interviews. We have tribal staff. We have a tribal forensic interviewer. We have a tribal victim advocate. We have a therapist who does trauma therapy, EMDR, to the families that we serve. And I know Carolyn touched on so many issues that really each one of them could probably have hours in of themselves. She touched on the jurisdictional issues that we face here in Indian country. And I felt like it was important for me to talk about how that applies to us here at the Puyallup tribe. We are the most urban reservation in the United States, and our reservation sits within 6 different jurisdictions, including the federal jurisdiction. So when you think about that, it's kind of mind-blowing. it's really difficult to get justice in the outside world, in the mainstream world, when you have a crime, you get local police, local criminal investigators, county prosecutors, county court, and state prison. And here in an Indian country, you have tribal courts that have jurisdiction over certain crimes. The federal feds have jurisdiction over major crimes. And then you have other state jurisdictions. Here we have, like I said, 5 different other county jurisdictions that we interface with and that serve our families within the reservation and around the Pierce County area. So as you can imagine, it's the pathway to justice is often very difficult, because if one person in that multiple circle of people involved drops the ball, then we're not going to get a case. And 67% of the cases that are provided to our federal prosecutors are declined due to evidentiary issues. So we have these very complex jurisdictional issues compounded by resources, availability of resources within Indian country. Our funding for our law enforcement, for our social services is and always has been at crisis levels. So justice can always be elusive. And I wanted to take some time today to share a little bit about my predecessor and my good friend, Dr. Verna Marie Bartlett, who was the founder, who is a Puyallup tribal elder, who devoted 40 years of her life to see her vision of bringing this model to her community. She pursued her doctorate degree so that we could, this was a quote from her dissertation: "To the members of my tribe, we can, we will, and we must do a better job at protecting our children. Join me." And she never stopped in her fierce advocacy, and at times joked about being fired several times because of her fierce advocacy to get this center up and going. She got to see it come to fruition in 2017, when the tribe received a grant to move forward with the development of the Child Advocacy Center. She sought me out, not because of the letters behind my name, but because of the love I have for our people. And she really wanted this model to be adopted within our community because, she spent much of her life, as I did, disproportionately representing every bad statistic that our people represent. And she really took that energy and devoted her life to make this happen, make this vision come to fruition. And so I really wanted to share that because I hope that people will take from here, yes, this is a serious issue, but we're also vibrant. We have a beautiful culture. We're still here. And there's many, many people across Turtle Island and Canada that are doing this work and that are devoting their life to our people, to the betterment of our people, and to create better communities and to create justice and healing for our people. So the MDT model really is more congruent with our traditional teachings. This is a quote from Chief Sitting Bull, and this is his daughter, Standing Holy. Let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children. Collaboration and a coordinated response is really traditionally how tribes responded to issues. And so the model, the MDT model, the purpose and the mission, which is, to provide education, to minimize trauma, to put that victim at the center, and create a space where all of the people that are involved in that pathway to justice for that child are around that child, that we're at the table communicating with one another so that that ball doesn't get dropped. And so that that child, that victim, and that non-offending caregiver have a space to come and share where they feel comfortable, where they can get all the services that they need for justice or for healing, or hopefully both. We always like to frame it from the start that healing really is the ultimate form of justice. And so being able to provide that evidence-based therapy and the education piece around trauma, the neuroscience of trauma, and how that has impacted our people. We have provided outreach and presentations around MMIW. We've partnered with CDVAP and other tribal programs to bring the issue of residential school and how that's impacted our communities, and all of the other policies that were really designed to assimilate us, and how that has impacted our communities. We have September 30th is a National Awareness Day around residential school and the impacts that's had in our community. So we have an event then that we provide to the community. We've also will be providing outreach and events next month around sexual assault awareness. The tribe has approved the no-hit zone model that's going to be a tribal-wide model against violence of any form. And we have an event around that really incorporates traditional teachings into that advocacy. So our Indian country MDT, I'm sitting in our MDT room in our center, and when we staff our cases, we have our partners, our county partners, our tribal prosecutors, our federal prosecutors, our mental health partners, our victim advocates, the forensic interviewer, and our law enforcement partners all sit around the table and make sure that we're not dropping the ball, that we are ensuring that all of the child's needs are being met, and that all of the resources that the family and the child need are being addressed, and holding each other accountable. So we meet regularly. We provide services to our county, the different various law enforcements that serve Puyallup tribal families. They will reach out to us. We've been able to establish relationships with our county child advocacy center, and we sit at the table with them now, which is, huge progress in terms of, building that pathway to justice. So whenever a child is identified as a tribal child, whether it's through the CPS, the child, our child welfare agency, of course, will reach out to us, and we follow a protocol that really mirrors a national protocol that all of our partners use. And it's also part of our mission statement that we are getting the training that we need, because it's kind of been, I worked in our ICW program for 20 years prior to coming to this position. And it's always was kind of the unwritten expectation that we followed county protocol, but we never really had access to the training around that. So that's a huge problem too. So we're part of our program is making sure that all of our partners are receiving the training, and that we have our shared protocol that is incorporated into the county protocol, that we're all kind of using the same tools, so that at any point of the investigation, we know that, and our partners will know that we utilize the same protocol. So it creates a smoother pathway to justice. Keeping the victim at the center. You know, it's really about making those relationships with our federal partners, with the FBI, with all the partners that are involved in that justice process, making sure that we're communicating with each other and staying on the same page and holding each other accountable and communicating and having relationships, because that's what's going to help ensure that our victims have a clear pathway to justice. So I'm just really thankful that we're at a place, because it hasn't always been like that. And across Indian country, we're one of only a handful of child advocacy centers. And I think it's expanding. However, there's not enough. And my hope is that, you know, that will change, that across Indian country, we will have, you know, the training, the resources that we need so that we can, you know, address some of these, you know, issues around communication, around, you know, the injustice. And I know that Rashida opened with this, but I was touched at the beginning of this presentation, because it really truly is how we begin, how we incorporate our traditional teachings into our center policies by including our ancestors, by bringing our Indigenous teachings into the work that we do, and weaving it into the work that we do. And so I was really thankful to hear that prayer and that acknowledgement. And I just put my hands up to all of you who are here today, all of you that have been a part of this and are here because you want to know more information about this really important issue and be a part of addressing it. And I'm just thankful to be here today.
Thank you, Laura, for just a beautiful presentation. And, you know, we just appreciate the compassionate way that you are relating this information to us. And we can't thank you enough. And we will definitely have the video on the recording on our YouTube channel. So that'll allow people to really kind of go back again and sort of digest everything. But, you know, we just pray that more of these centers, as you mentioned, it can be replicated. This cultural responsiveness to the families can be replicated so that they can, you know, get the healing that they need. So thank you so much, Laura. And next we're going to have Colleen. So Colleen, Laura, you can stop sharing your screen right now, and then we'll have Colleen. I just wanted to share a few points about Colleen. Colleen is a professor in the Educational Specialist Department and the director of the Barbara and Jordan Center for Children of Trauma and Domestic Violence at Cabrini University in Radnor, Pennsylvania. And she's actively involved in community organizations while serving on numerous board positions, including past co-president of the Laurel House, a comprehensive domestic violence agency in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and secretary of the board of the Delaware County Victim Assistance Center. So Colleen is going to share her expertise, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Colleen.
Thank you so much, Rashida, for having me here today. And I'm just in awe of Laura and Carolyn's work. I'm just so pleased to be here in such good company. I've learned so much myself already. So without further ado, I'm just going to talk a little bit about my background in terms of trauma. And I'm an educator but I am also the center director for the Barbara and John Jordan Center for Children of Trauma and Domestic Violence Education at Cabrini University. And so what you see on the screen here, if you go to cabrini.edu/Jordan Center, we do have training opportunities. We include resources on our page, and we offer a lot of free programming. And so this is just one example of some of the program we offer. We host a domestic violence education symposium every year. And with that, this past year, we had the importance of connection and healing voices of survivors of sexual assault, dating, and domestic violence. So we had a speaker. Her name was Sarah Klein. She was the first, one of the first survivors from the Larry Nassar gymnastics abuse scandal. And she spoke with us, and then we had panelists that came in and talked about ways in which they have healed and tried to heal in regards to sexual assault, dating, and domestic violence. So I encourage you to go there. There is a way to join our listserv. We don't send out a lot of emails, but when we do have free events, we will send out emails. And so if you're interested in getting on our listserv, you can find that there. So some of what I'm going to share is about stress and trauma and what that looks like. And so as you could see here, stress is of course a response to a stimulus, a stressor, any stimulus that causes that reaction or response. And I think that in regards to what we're talking about here today, and I think Carolyn touched on this a little bit, when we have these events, stress events are not experienced in the same way. So when we have women who are murdered or who are missing, even though it's affecting their families, it's still different for each family. And so recognizing that each individual also has their own response to some type of stress or trauma, I think that that's really important to note. And so when we look at this leveling of stress, we of course have mild or positive stress. So I usually explain this, that is, if a student is getting ready for a test, they might have that mild or positive stress. And that's something that we want folks or individuals to have. We want them to, because that helps us to build our resilience. It helps us to build our strength. And so it's when we get to tolerable or moderate stress, that could be a divorce, it could be a death in the family. And when we think about children or individuals, even, we're able to get through that tolerable or moderate stress when we have our relationships that support us in that way. It's when we get to this toxic or chronic stress. And these can be things like racism. It could be the way in which people are living. It could be poverty. So that toxic or chronic stress, that is when I heard the analogy one time, and I thought that it was a great explanation. But when we think about a car's engine revving all of the time, and we think about that biology of our bodies, it's living in our bodies. And so that toxic or chronic stress in somebody's body, they don't ever have a time that they can level off that stress. They're at a heightened arousal all the time, and their hormones are constantly going. And that's where that biology piece could come in. And there's a lot, again, that we could talk about here. But I wanted to bring that forth to consider that, and then we have, of course, trauma. And so, but before we get to trauma, I wanted to show here what we're seeing here is this conflict related stressors and trauma exposures and how they can have that effect through the life course. And so you can see here, when we have these disrupted services, displacement, sexual, physical violence, here's abduction, child soldiering, and trafficking. and trauma, loss of a family member, poverty, financial insecurity. So we can see how that could, even when we look at that epigenetic piece, it can live in somebody's body and it can continue through somebody's body, and we can pass it on to our own children, which I'll talk about in just a few moments. And so here we think about trauma, and I have just two examples of definitions here. There's many others, but also we have to consider when we think about trauma, we think about the DSM-3 was the diagnostic measurement tool that was used a few years ago. We're on the DSM-5 now, but between DSM-3 and 5, the trauma definition has expanded. And so when we hear, and it's actually a very good thing, we're talking about it more, we're learning more about it, we're learning more about how we can survive from trauma, we're learning how we can support one another. So it's really important that we think about how we identify trauma. And so when we look also at complex trauma and what is complex trauma, so this was first explored. This is a great resource, and I'll have some other resources as well at the end. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network, they convened a complex trauma task force. And from that, they were able to have this term. And this was the term that emerged from the recognition that many people experience multiple adversities over the course of their lifetime. And if you're not familiar with the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, ACEs, I highly recommend researching that a bit further. It looks at the number of ACEs somebody might face in their lifetime. And they have since expanded the ACEs, the original ACEs, to include many others, like poverty, for example, like racism, as I spoken about earlier. And so we've learned that we're focusing on the impact. So how is that person feeling? How is it affecting them? And not the nature of the event. So for example, if we have someone, a woman who is missing, Indigenous woman who's missing, and how is that affecting those family members? Not necessarily, again, the fact that it's a missing person, but how is it affecting somebody? And that's really important too, that we consider each person is an individual. I just was describing this the other day. We've all gone through a collective trauma, for example, with the COVID-19 pandemic, and how we've each been affected by that as individual, and how we responded to that and are responding to that as individual. And we have to consider the individual. And so when we think about this, and I was happy to hear Carolyn speak a little bit about the boarding schools, because when we think about intergenerational trauma, and so this includes trauma, that accumulation of stress, the adaptive characteristics to that trauma, which took place for various reasons in a previous generation, and are now manifesting similar adaptations in the present day. So when we think about the intergenerational trauma and the Native American people and what they have faced, that's something that we have to consider. If you're not familiar with the movie Encanto, they look at that intergenerational trauma and how that can affect a family throughout their lifetime. That's really something that we have to understand as we continue to educate ourselves and others about trauma. And so, Carolyn, it was interesting. This was from 2016, and I saw that you had stats from 2018. Like you, I had difficulty finding updated statistics, which I think speaks to the importance of this, that there needs to be some updated statistics, which I'm sure they're out there, but regardless, they're a little hard to find, so make them easier, right, for us to see those. But I also noted that the third leading cause of death for Native women is murder. So I just thought that this was a wonderful piece there, and you can see in the source there. I thought this was a great depiction as well. And so when we think about, again, that intergenerational trauma and how it's increased as perceived dangers do accumulate. And so some of these perceived dangers could include growing up in a community where drug use is transparent and prevalent, witnessing consistent substance misuse in the home, right? And again, this isn't just related to Native American population. This is just overall intergenerational trauma. And then that last one, though, hearing stories of family members, in this case, Indigenous women who have gone missing, violence against women, including murder. So hearing these stories can, again, exasperate that trauma. So I'm getting ready to close here, and I know I'm a little over time, so I'm just going to continue quickly. But this is a documentary, documentary movie, Voices Unheard, that I thought I would mention. If you haven't seen it, it might be of interest to you. Marty Cooley is a Native American entrepreneur living in New York City. And when her Native American business partner, Jess, vanishes without a trace on a business trip to Arizona, she becomes a voice, Marty, for the voices that are unheard. And then I'm going to sit on this slide for, you know what, we're not going to show that. And it's about, I forget how long that documentary is, but regardless, if you have the opportunity, please watch that. These are some resources. I'm leaving the QR code there. It should link you to a Google Doc. And so if you're interested in some other resources, there's a couple videos, there's a couple websites very similar to what Carolyn shared as well. And so lastly, I will show my presenter information in just a minute. I'm just sitting on this slide a few more seconds to give you that opportunity, and I can share this too if it's easiest to send it out to the group. And then lastly, here is my information. In case you need to reach out to me, feel free to email me if you're looking for more information. I did see a bunch of comments. I didn't get a chance to read them yet, but I'll look through them. And I thank you for allowing me this space to share. Rashida, I thank you so much for this. I just feel like I'm in such great company. So thank you.
Thank you, Colleen, for sharing your expertise on trauma. And there were some questions. So, thankfully you've left your information and the resources that, others can also take a look at as well. So we actually had planned some questions that I wanted to ask of the panel, but we also have a lot of conversation going on the chat. And so I kind of want to just shift a little bit and ask a few people to just, unmute themselves, raise your hand and just share a couple of points with us. What are you taking away, or what do we need to think about as you've sat here in this presentation? So while someone is, getting ready to volunteer, again, I wanted to just thank the ladies for just a wonderful presentation. So I think Kimberly has her hand up. Can we unmute her? Sister Regina, are we able to?
I've asked her to
Hello?
unmute. Yeah.
Oh,
Hello.
Hi, Kimberly.
yes.
Okay, go ahead,
Can you
please.
guys hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Yate. My name is Kimberly Wapipa. I am from Gallup, New Mexico. I am ambassador and survivor of human trafficking. I just want to thank the presenters and this awareness, because this needs to be spoken about. And I actually went to an event last night, and how devastated I was about the human trafficking, MMIW, how disappointed the international people out there who had that white syndrome, that are not really presenting Indigenous women included in their presentations last night. I was trying to get in there, trying to speak, and they just kept making excuses, pushing me away. And I was really hurt, because as a survivor advocating for this for like 10 years, and I felt discriminated last night, because as an Indigenous person, we have a higher rate than any other race. Here in New Mexico, Albuquerque and Gallup have the highest rate of Native women that have been missing, sexual assault, raped, and murdered, and nobody's not doing anything about it. And the fact that we have more girls and women and children and that have been trafficked or missing. In many cases, that what I found out last night is there's undercovers doing searches online on the site, but there's not many Indigenous people working with these high international human trafficking organizations. But when I witnessed last night was very devastated because of how they turned me away. They ignored me. And the fact that there was someone from the FBI that was there, he seen me, he didn't want to speak to me. He kept turning around. And I thought, wow, this is something that needs to be addressed boldly, but nobody doesn't want to talk to me about the situations that needs to be addressed, and also the getting to the clarification of what's going on, and to the point of how a person could be trafficked, especially on tribal land, and the fact that they aren't want to listen. And that's where our ally is. And I was so mad when I came home. I actually cried because of everything that I've been doing. I'm doing a volunteer basis. And
Kimberly, I just,
the hurt.
yeah, it's obviously, our hearts go out to you because no one wants to feel invisible. And the fact that this issue of human trafficking is really related to Indigenous women, and they are certainly impacted by this, and that your voice was silenced, that's really unfortunate. I'm going to let any of the speakers like Carolyn or Laura, can you speak to Kimberly's experience or share anything?
I would just like to say that you are doing something, Kimberly, by being out there and making your voice heard. Because I can say that when I started this work, when I shifted from ICW to come over to the Child Advocacy Center, the tribe didn't have any laws around human trafficking. They didn't exist. They weren't in our tribal code. And we sit on the I-5 corridor in the most urban reservation in the United States. We're a casino tribe. And it just kind of blew me away that this was happening. I'm also a survivor. And I have my grandchildren's mother was murdered. My nephew was murdered. And like I said earlier, I check box just about every disproportionate statistic that is out there. And making sure that we do that advocacy within our community. People like Carolyn, there's other people who we've been so impacted by this, and the way that we can address it is to continue to be that voice and advocate for change, advocate for laws. And when I first came into this position, it's a child advocacy center, although we did want to make connections to our vulnerable adults, our elders, and we have. I thought there's so many things that we need to do to get this child advocacy center up and running. Do we really have time for this? But I knew that it was a calling that we had to. And we now do have it's part of our code. We have our human trafficking project coordinator sitting here with us. We've had all kinds of awareness activities around this issue within our tribal community and outside of our tribal community, like we're doing today. That's something, and your voice is powerful, and don't ever think it's not. Keep doing what you're doing, keep standing up and fighting for your people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura, for responding. And I believe we have 3 hands up. Sister Regina, can you help us? Like who has their hand up? Okay.
Next one is Sadia Ahmed.
Okay, Sadia, would you share your points, please?
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much for this wonderful program, sharing these stories and shedding light to an issue that I have personally not been very aware of. So I really appreciate this information. A question that I had was, and maybe this was covered and I missed it, is are there any statistics on who the perpetrators of these violent acts are? Is there a certain group, or is there any information available on that? Thank you.
Carolyn, or yeah, okay, Laura, great.
I just wanted to say one thing, because my elder brain, if I don't say it, it'll go away. Sadly, it's not just us Indian people that know about these, very complex jurisdictional issues. It's the bad guys. They know that we're a vulnerable population because of all of the issues that exist in Indian country, and they capitalize on it. And then that's it. I'm going to let Carolyn, she's the statistics lady.
When you said that, I realized that I didn't put a statistics slide in there. When it comes to the perpetrators, you really can't say, because what we would vision, like the stereotypes that we have in our head or what we think is often not it. When it comes to trafficking, in our communities last year, trafficking rates went up from familial trafficking rates went up from 32% to 41%. So primarily it's family in that arena, and then close family or close family friends and people that we know is the next highest as far as trafficking goes. And we know the high rates of homicide and trafficking. It's not documented very often, but we have survivor stories, and those stories are our data. It's just not compiled. And as far as domestic violence, it's all intra-racial. It's outside of our communities that it's happening, but there's really not a lot of data or any that says whether they're taxi cab drivers, pizza delivery people, business associates, it could be anyone.
It really, Carolyn, just really speaks to the structural injustice that's so embedded in our society that, the society doesn't care enough to even collect the data regarding these problems. So, it's quite unfortunate. But the good news is that, there is more awareness. We don't see this information in the national press and national news outlets, but certainly on social media, you really see the groups that are really advocating and and really providing that awareness for everyone. So do we have another question? We have time for one more point.
There was one in the chat asking if there were any stats on repeated attempts.
Probably the same response. Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to. We're closing at the end. I wanted to just wrap up a bit. One moment, please. Thank you for your patience. So today has been a very special day. We feel very privileged, AAJ Women, to be able to be in your presence, to learn from you, and just the way you've leaned into us and just share this information with such compassion and caring for the audience. We're so indebted to you. And I can personally say to the audience that these women are very busy. They're extremely busy, and just so that they would give up their time today, we're certainly grateful to Carolyn, DeFord, Laura, Bluehorse-Swift, and Dr. Colleen Lelli. And on behalf of the executive committee, we also thank you. And I wanted you all to keep in mind that we are a fairly new organization, but we are looking to form alliances with women who are involved in this work. We do have some national partners, the League of Women Voters, Humanity First, When We All Vote. And there's a list of partners that we work with, and you can find those partnerships on our website, absolutejustice.us. And God willing, we are planning a day on the Hill, which would be an advocacy day for missing MMIWs. And so this is what we hope to accomplish, but we would sort of be in the back, and we certainly want the Indigenous women to be in the front. We obviously are not going to try to speak for women, but we want to advocate. We want to be your sisters. We want to build this relationship, and we understand that this relationship happens over time, but we want to serve and we want to partner. So we will be sending out post-webinar evaluation forms. So please, please complete that. Give us your information. The presenters would like to hear from you. We want to hear from you. We want to get that feedback as well. And please, please subscribe, follow us, AAJ Women USA. It's very simple, AAJ Women USA. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and God willing, we will have the recording of the video up for everyone to be able to view and go back over it. So in closing, can we just take 1 minute to just everyone put their hands up, and let's just say a prayer for all of those, the families that are impacted, the women, the work that's being done to really shift the energy in a positive fashion. So can we all just join together and say a silent prayer? I mean, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, ladies. And we're going to close at this point. We had 2 participants raise their hand if you wanted to. Did we hear from them already? But we're actually closing. Did you want to say something really quickly or what? Okay, so we're going to stop at this point, and we just thank you so much. Thank you very much.